What a way to start the morning. Otherwise, I'm in a perfectly good mood, because guess who's coming here today? Peter Pocklington. And I want to find out if this man is crazy, if he's a weirdo.
Going after a man's throat. I'm not after anybody's throat.
Puck, this is you up there. I'm going to burn you, Peter Puck, because you are burning us. That's what we think of Peter Puck!
Peter Pocklington, the owner of the Oilers. Peter, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
One thing I can't stand is someone coming to me and putting a gun to my head.
Peter Pocklington, Peter Puck, Peter Porklington. In Edmonton, he is a divisive figure that has, for better or for worse, shaped the city. Many have tried to emulate his tenacious free market style, his newsworthy antics and attitude, and his ability to make a deal. For a while, the face of Edmonton and the New West was Peter Hugh Pocklington. Peter was born in 1941 in Regina, Saskatchewan, to English immigrant parents.
You were 14 years of age.
Oh, I was 8. My folks went off to Toronto. We lived in the east at that time, and they went away for the weekend, and we had 2 garages. He had just built one, and I decided the old one was an eyesore, and gathered a bunch of the local kids together, and we tore it down, and I sold the lumber and took them all to the show.
They soon moved to London, Ontario, where he would spend most of his formative years.
He came out of Toronto originally.
London, Ontario, grew up.
While spending time with his grandparents in Manitoba, Peter would find old cars on neighboring properties, ship them to his home in Ontario, and fix them up to sell them for a tidy profit. By 17, he owned an entire apartment complex. By 25, he owned a car dealership, becoming the youngest person ever to own a Ford dealership in Canada. By 29, seeing the free market and oil revenue potential of Alberta, Peter sold his dealership and moved out to Edmonton to run a Ford dealership off 75th Street and Argyle Road.
To Alberta, what, 10 years ago?
1971, Jack.
With money to burn and a love of sport in his heart, he put a down payment on a 50% stake on a World Hockey Association team, the Edmonton Oilers. After a lackluster first season, the Oilers' co-owner Nelson Scalbania sold the last of his shares to Pocklington for a cool $500,000.
Scalbania gave you, and he regrets it now, the option on the Oilers for nothing.
Not quite, $500,000.
Oh, it's $500,000.
That's correct.
Well, in those days, $500,000.
Same as $1 million today.
It was nothing, wasn't it?
That's
in
true.
those days.
That's correct.
He was off to Indianapolis to work with another World Hockey Association team, the Racers. Back in Edmonton, Peter was shuffling things around with the organization and always taking risks. In the late 70s and 80s, no one could have predicted which hockey league would come out on top. The NHL was having serious issues with a few of their teams, and the WHA was struggling to get players in attendance. In 1977, a plan to merge the 2 leagues was brought to the table. This was summarily rejected by everyone. The NHL went back to operations as usual, but the WHA owners had different plans. To attract less expensive underage players to their league, they would hire 17-year-olds as employees of the team rather than players, sniping them before they could get NHL contracts. This was Wayne Gretzky's first contract, not as a player, but as an employee of Nelson Scalbania and the Indianapolis Racers. He played 8 games with the Racers before being traded to Winnipeg, and then immediately being traded to Edmonton. By 1979, the NHL had seen its worst profits since 1930. They would finally accept the merger with the WHA for its 4 most profitable teams: Edmonton, Winnipeg, Quebec City, and Hartford. Little did anyone know, Edmonton would go on to win 5 Stanley Cups and create an NHL dynasty. Any businessman worth his salt has a diversified portfolio of investments and businesses. Pocklington was no slouch in that department. After purchasing the Oilers, he went on to purchase 2 more sports franchises, the Trappers baseball team and the Drillers indoor soccer team, making Edmonton a major player in the North American sports market. He also added to his real estate portfolio, purchasing Swift's and Gainer's meatpacking plant in Edmonton's historic processing districts, North and South Packingtown. As an Edmontonian in 1980, you could buy a car, use it to get to a hockey game where you would eat a smoky or a hot dog, and Pocklington would be making money off of you every single step of the way. Pocklington's good fortune looked like it would never run out.
Are you a rich man, Scalbania who made it? A flip-flop artist who struck money quickly and you're now just playing at politics?
I don't think so, Jack. In fact, I moved to Alberta in '71 and boom times, got into business. In fact, many businesses. They've all done well, had a tough time in the last couple of years with high rates of interest. But no, I'm very seriously concerned about where my country's going.
The oil crisis hit Alberta fast and hard. It had survived the American oil crisis of the 70s thanks to nationalizing efforts like the National Energy Program. However, the NEP would turn against the province come 1981. Alberta's GDP dropped significantly, interest rates crested 20%, and without freedom to adjust prices and rates, the province floundered. Suddenly, Pocklington's bottom line was feeling the heat, but he was playing it cool. He quoted in his biography, "I thought I was bulletproof, until I was shot." Until now, that quote rang true. He had succeeded in every business venture up until this point. This newest venture wouldn't be for the money, it would be for his life. Pocklington was walking out of his Tudor-style mansion on the edge of Edmonton's University District when he spotted a man with a chrome revolver walking right towards him. That man was Mirko Petrovic, a 29-year-old unemployed construction laborer from Yugoslavia. Putting the revolver to Pocklington's head, he led him back into the house where Eva Pocklington was on the phone. She dropped it in panic and rushed to hang it up. The Pocklingtons' babysitter and housekeeper were also rounded up and brought to the kitchen. Mirko wanted $5 million now, to which Pocklington immediately refused. According to him, he went into business mode. He counter-offered for $1 million. Let me repeat that. He counter-offered a guy with a gun to his head. After some arguing, it was settled that $2 million would be the final total. Everyone was shuffled into the living room and tied to chairs with wire. Eva was pushed up the stairs to change into something other than her sleeping gown, and when she emerged with a t-shirt and jeans, the phone rang again. It was Peter's secretary, Irene. When Eva dropped the phone, her friend called Peter's office to confirm everything was all right. "Eva, is everything all right?" said the secretary. Eva responded, "Claire, I can't make it to lunch. Sorry, goodbye." Not knowing who Claire was, Irene smelled something fishy and proceeded to call the Edmonton police. Mirko was getting nervous. Something seemed off, and he needed to get away quick with some collateral. He told Eva to back her Porsche out of the garage so he could get his Bronco in. That's right, he owned a Ford. The irony is lost on no one. The plan was to kidnap her and run from the law until the ransom could be paid. No one knows what would have happened to Eva after that, but she did exactly as was told, backing up the Porsche down the driveway until she saw a police officer. She ran for her life, screaming, and Mirko didn't think the police would show up so fast. He smashed a window to gain quick access to the home, with plans to kill Peter and the 2 employees. Peter counter-offered his own execution. Mirko could have his jet and the $2 million. They could fly to an abandoned airstrip in the USA, and he could disappear into the countryside, D.B. Cooper style. Mirko bought it. After a few phone calls to the police, and moving Peter to the master bedroom to avoid sniper fire, the deal was brokered. Now they had to wait for the police to get the cash. 11 tense hours passed, with many emotional ups and downs. But by 8:30, the cash was tossed into the kitchen, and Mirko led Peter downstairs at gunpoint, using him as a human shield. He made a quick search of the other rooms on the main floor, and as Peter was retrieving the cash for him, an overzealous police officer leapt out of the dining room doorway and shot his M16. The round hit Peter in the arm and then continued into Mirko's arm, causing him to fire his pistol. He narrowly missed Peter's back. Pocklington would recover in 3 days and be out in time to watch his Edmonton trappers. Mirko would get 15 years but only serve 5. Upon hearing of the news of his deportation, he called Pocklington and asked for $10,000 so he could buy a gravel truck and start a construction business. The last time anyone would hear about Mirko Petrovic, it was 1988, and his business had become so successful, he had to buy 2 gravel trucks. Packingtown was a blue-collar neighborhood in North and South Edmonton built around the meat industry. Originally, only servicing the Swift Canadian packing plant in 1908, it would expand to Burns Packers in 1911, Capital Packers in 1929, and Canadian Packers in 1936. With 4 major meat distributors and rail access via the Canadian Northern and Grand Trunk Pacific lines, Edmonton was Canada's largest stockyard and second only to Chicago in North America by the end of World War II. Entire neighborhoods were planned and built around getting workers and product efficiently from the plants to the rail cars to the grocery store shelves. These workers were essential, and they knew it. And with every essential worker, there comes the need for security. The Local 78 Union was established in 1937 to bring grievances to plant owners. This would be absorbed into a larger union, the United Packing House Workers of America, and despite a few strikes from 1944 to 1978, the majority of the UPWA's history is peaceful. It was a stable investment, which is exactly what Pocklington was looking for. While Edmonton's north side packing town was still profitable by the late 70s, the cracks were starting to show. Nowhere was this crack more apparent than the smaller south side packing town. In 1978, Pocklington brokered a deal with the owner of Gainers for his historic plant off of 96th Street and 80th Avenue. The same year, Burns Packers would shut down their south side operation, ending Packingtown South. Come 1979, Pocklington would shutter the Gainers plant and purchase the Swift Meat Packing Plant on 66th Street and Yellowhead Trail in Packingtown North. He would rebrand it to the Gainers name. The UPWA would merge with a larger food workers union to bolster their power and their job security. By 1984, the meat barons were strong-arming union workers by either shutting down plants or forcing them to accept unfavorable concessions. Pocklington tested his own employees. He demanded an extension to the current wage freeze, reduction of wages, larger daily quotas, and a reduction in benefits.
In this case, I offered the union before the strike the same contract they had for the past 2 years, and they turned that down. They wanted parity with Canada Packers in Toronto, which we could not afford.
Was that $3 or $4 an hour more?
It was roughly a 27.5% increase over what we had in the last 2 years.
The workers were poised to strike, but the availability of low-cost scabs due to plant closures and a poor economy had forced the union's hand. Pocklington had stared down the bull and won, but he made one fatal error. He cited the unprofitability of the plant while negotiating with the union, and promised that once the plant was profitable, he would share the reward. 5 months into 1986, and while the profit seemed to return, there was no sign of a reward. Pocklington once again stared down the union bull. Another reduction in wages, larger quotas, and the straw that broke the camel's back: complete removal of the employee pension plan. Rumors swirled that Pocklington himself was going to absorb the pension fund and pocket it. The union unanimously rejected his offer. If they didn't get a better deal by the end of May, they would strike. Pocklington held firm.
Because they wouldn't talk to me before the strike went on June 1. If they had sat down and wanted to negotiate, as normally free people do in a free society, we'd never had a problem. If they don't wish to work, fine. They can go and lie in the sun. If they don't wish to work, we all must contribute to make a country work.
That was the most violent strike seen in Western Canada probably since the end of the war. 460 people arrested.
That you draw a line, and if the enemy steps over it, you'd knock him on the toes with a hammer.
June 1st, 1986, at 1 minute past midnight, the workers of the Gainers plant walked and formed a striking picket line. What no one could foresee was that this was to be the largest and most violent strike in Alberta's history. Over 1,000 meat packers lined 66th Street in a strong showing of solidarity. Pocklington's union breaker, Leo Bolanes, tried to bring in scabs to cross the line and bring the plant back to full operation. It was met with violence. By day 2, the police had arrived, and they were ready to work.
Take that one. Take that one. Take that one.
Over 300 strikers were arrested, and by day 3, an untold amount beaten. By day 5, the first use of the Edmonton riot squad was recorded. They would escort scabs across the picket line in any way possible. By mid-June, the police's overtime budget had reached $500,000, and a third of its workforce, 375 officers, were busting over 1,500 packers and supporters. And the support was growing. Pocklington won an injunction that said the strikers couldn't strike on his property, so a local church blockaded the entrance with a giant cross and 3,000 supporters. Union workers across Alberta, 10 to 12,000 strong, rallied at the legislature to send a strong message to Premier Don Getty. We aren't taking it anymore. In the grand scheme, the Gainers' strike was a small part of a huge provincial strike in 1986. From Fort McMurray in the north to Calgary in the south, it seemed like every union was striking. Despite the union's best efforts, Pocklington and Bolanes kept Gainers working at 2/3 capacity, and product was still getting to store shelves. That's when the strikers started to boycott. Packages of Gainers meat products were punctured in stores so that they would rot. Pamphlets were handed out telling people what to look for and what meat to boycott. Anything with the inspection stamp 18B was tossed in the garbage. During an Oilers game in Montreal, supporters paraded around in a pig and hot dog costume in protest. A year prior, Pocklington had tried to strong-arm Albertan pork producers to lower their prices, and he was given a special nickname. It seemed more applicable now than ever: Peter Pocklington. Peter Pocklington was losing this fight. He just didn't know it yet. The strike continued into December with no signs of stopping. To support the strikers, a local charity raised $100,000 and held a toy drive so that the Packers could give their children a regular Christmas. Premier Don Getty had had enough. Pocklington had to find a resolution to this strike, and he had to find one now. The Packers union had tabled an agreement in December, and it was going to be ratified. Wages were frozen until 1988, and then wage increases by 3% the following years of 1989 and 1990. Pensions were left in the workers' hands, and strikers were hired back in place of scabs. The union had won for now, but their future would be very, very bleak. While it looked like Pocklington and the union came to a mutual agreement, it couldn't have been farther from the truth.
Now, the final settlement. You opened the window of opportunity, as I recall, for one day and said, take it or leave it. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily so. We sat down and negotiated for a day, and we found that, strangely enough, we had room to move, and we came out with a good 4-year contract.
Will all the previous employees get their jobs back?
I believe most of them who want them back.
So that was one of the provisions in your final settlement?
That's correct.
To get Pocklington to the negotiation table, Premier Don Getty had to bribe him with $60 million of public funds, all to be paid back with profits over a 3-year period. Pocklington agreed to the deal, but his mind was already made up. The plant had to go, or he had to go. He wasn't paying a red cent. The 1980s had been hard on his businesses. The Albertan recession had officially lasted from 1982 until 1988, and everyone was feeling the squeeze. Interest rates on property were up to 24%, making that portion of Pocklington's empire quite pricey to maintain. The Gainer's ordeal had put him into deep debt with the Alberta government, and no one had the cash to buy any new cars. But ever being an optimist, Peter looked towards the positive parts of his business. After all, he had the best NHL team in the league, with the best player the game had ever seen. Gretzky sold his weight in tickets every single night. Nothing could ruin that investment, right?
And it's with mixed emotions, a heavy heart for our community and our hockey club, but I guess with delight and sincere best wishes for Wayne Gretzky, that I announce, and I guess more important, confirm, that the Edmonton Oilers have agreed to trade Wayne Gretzky to Los Angeles.
Sports fans to this day will argue who gets the blame on the trade. Was it Pocklington trying to pay down his debt? Was it the NHL trying to send their golden boy to the second largest American market to pump up sales? Was it Gretzky's wife Janet for wanting to be closer to Hollywood? All three parties claim innocence. They all say it was just the right thing to do at the time. Further to that, the Drillers Soccer Club would fold in 1982 when the league couldn't make a profit. And while the Trappers were winning championships, Edmonton wasn't spending its cash on baseball. By 1989, the Alberta government realized that Peter wasn't planning on paying off his $61 million debt. The government took ownership of the Gainers plant, and Peter was out of the meat business. While the Oilers were always his fallback for profit, after the Gretzky trade, they weren't performing. Despite winning a Stanley Cup in 1990, Pocklington couldn't have been more worried. Ticket sales were down, and player salaries were up. He had always been operating the team on a loan from the Alberta Treasury branch at an interest rate of 19%. Essentially, the Oilers were purchased on a huge credit card. Having trouble keeping up with interest payments, he tried to blame the fans. He threatened to sell the team to other cities, saying that if season ticket quotas weren't met, the NHL would be forced to move the Oilers somewhere profitable. While that worked in the short term, when he approached the Treasury branch for $120 million more, they declined. A massive seizure of assets followed. Jets, cars, real estate, companies, everything he owned, everything attached to the Pocklington name was fair game. By 1998, after being stripped bare and hiding his liquid assets in the States, offshore accounts, and through his family, Pocklington sold the Oilers and moved to California. He would still operate other Edmonton sports clubs, like the Revived Drillers and the Trappers, until the mid-2000s. In 2009, while attempting to get away from his creditors, he filed for bankruptcy to the tune of $19.6 million. However, during his deposition, he perjured himself and disclosed that one of his many offshore accounts had paid him money for consulting, an offshore account that he failed to include in his bankruptcy statement. The case did bring the secret of Pocklington's wealth to light, as he had to disclose his financial statements. Pocklington had been borrowing millions of dollars from businesses for decades. Any penny he made would be thrown into his family's accounts, offshore holdings, or number companies set up for the purpose of laundering revenue. And while some of the money he owed was paid back to creditors, as of 2017, he still owes the people of Alberta $21.6 million. Speaking of 2017, Peter was again in the news. He had committed securities fraud in California after embezzling $600,000 from yet another company he had set up. Regardless of what you think of Pocklington, he has certainly led an exciting life. His eternal optimism and drive to make a deal made him Edmonton's premier businessman throughout the 70s and 80s. There is so much story to his life. I didn't even get into his fights with Edmonton City Council, his federal conservative prime ministerial run, and the launching of a major TV station. He golfed with American presidents. He had a lot of adventures. Much like his contemporaries, his antiquated business practices and heavy debt loading may have eventually gotten the better of him, but the free market is kind to its veterans. Yes, he may be summoned to court and has tons of debt, but he lives comfortably in California. He still returns to Edmonton from time to time, usually to do something with the Oilers club, for which he gets very nostalgic. He is quoted as saying that he still loves Edmonton, but I'm not sure it loves him back. He fought with every citizen, borrowed every dollar, and swindled every sucker he could. Yet it's hard to ignore that he had a huge part in making Edmonton what it is today. I can see why he wants to return. Edmonton is the house that Pocklington built. Thanks for watching.
How much are you worth? $500 million?
No,
Couple of $100 million.
I don't know. It doesn't matter. I've been successful at business. I enjoy business.
You're financially secure for
I'm
the rest of your
financially
life.
secure.
Right? You
Yes.
brought in all kinds of strike breakers. And did you won it financially, didn't
Just
you?
a minute now. Who? Strike breakers?
Yeah, strike
We didn't bring
breakers.
any strike breakers in. We bought gentlemen to drive buses so we could get through these lines to get our replacement people back to work.
Peter.
Are you worried about the reaction at all that you'll get here?
No, as I told the guys, an old Shakespearean line, a brave man dies once, a coward dies every day. And I don't really give a damn what some of the unwashed have to say. Someday they'll grow up.
Right.
Well, and I don't really care if they do or not,
Yeah.
obviously.
Promised Mess I wouldn't do this. But as I said, there comes a time when
Didn't Scalbania have to give you them for $250,000?
No, it was negotiated. I think that, remember, I bought him when he was 17. We really didn't know how great the great Gretzky was going to be.
For the first time ever, I'm going to have a little chat with that man who gets incredible publicity. Buys hockey clubs, buys hockey players, buys this, buys that, owns half the town, knocks down houses to build other ones. The Nelson Scalbania.
People are saying that Wayne Gretzky didn't want to go, that you forced him to take the trade.
Absolutely not. Had a phone call from Wayne on the 27th of July. I definitely want to be moved to LA, period.
But did Wayne have the understanding that you were shopping around to trade
I was
him?
not shopping around anywhere. I took Wayne into the boardroom of Molson's and said, Wayne, you have the opportunity to back out. I do not want to trade you. He made Ian Berrigan and Mike Barnett aware of that conversation and stated, I want to be moved. I do not want to remain in Edmonton.
Who do you think that they're going to believe, the people of Edmonton?
I guess it really doesn't matter. They're going to believe whoever they want to believe.
Last question. Would you trade Gretzky to the Vancouver Canucks for any amount of money?
Maybe if you threw in Vancouver.